According to all scientific evidence, we will have to make some dramatic changes in the coming years to ease the impact of the imminent climate emergency. Scientific approaches are important, but we can also learn a lot from elders and knowledge keepers of First Nations, Inuit, and Metis communities. That's where the Lake Winnipeg Indigenous Collective comes in.
Well, my name is Daniel Gladue-Canoe. I'm from Anawajing, which is a community in the Treaty 3 area. Most people know Lake of the Woods. I'm also descended from Red River Métis and Irish. Yeah, I guess I've been pretty lucky to grow up for a big part of my life on the water in Treaty 3 area. I think that has just brought with me, a passion to protect it. And as I've done that work through biological sciences and other things, I've gotten to know a lot of other First Nation people and got to see kind of firsthand what some of the challenges are that we're facing, on the water. So I'm the director here at the Lake Winnipeg Indigenous Collective, and this is a group of First Nations who really came together around the problem of seeing the lake in decline, and yet not having a say in that protection and conservation of the lake. And really year after year, seeing just really failures coming from provincial and federal governments and surrounding municipalities who really didn't seem to take that responsibility serious, something that many of our elders have counseled us to, that we have to step up, because the water really connects us to life, to all the other plants, animals, and medicines that we live with.
Manitoba has so much water, so it's great to go out onto the water, but over the years, we've seen the many challenges and things that have been impacting it. I know one of the things people always talk about are aquatic invasive species, but the challenges go far beyond that. Daniel, how about you just talk to me a little bit about what you're seeing within at least Lake Winnipeg, some of the struggles or challenges or problems that it's currently facing?
For anyone who's come to this land, you see that it is a water place, right? We have rivers. If you go farther north, there's lots of lakes. We have wetlands. It's really a place of water and the water overlapping the land. And it has brought us so many great things. But of course, when used and abused, you start to get problems. So we see, if we think just starting from the south, we have excess nutrients like phosphorus getting into lakes and rivers, which causes kind of runaway algal blooms, which can be a real challenge for the aquatic species that live in the lake, and of course can be also just kind of gross for lots of people. We hear from lots of fishers getting algae stuck in their nets and kind of ruining the day's fish, right? There's been a lot to do with flooding. We've seen a lot of flooding this spring, and one of the problems we have is that water has been too quickly drained from the farmlands in the prairies, which has led to more severe, more intense flooding. When you add climate change onto that, it gets worse and worse, right? And unfortunately for First Nations, we've kind of put in the pathway of that. We're sort of at the bottom of most of the rivers, where many of our communities are located. And so we suffer greatly because of that. And it's not like we have to sit here and just wait for it to come either, right? There is things that we can do in the interim, certainly flood protections, but also we're looking to see that more of that water stays on the land throughout the year. We may still experience some drought conditions this coming summer, which seems
absurd,
pretty incredible,
right?
Yeah. There are measures and relying on what this place used to look like with lots of wetlands and things like that. One of the first things we did before the collective really had gotten started was starting to look at how we could identify species coming in. And at the time, zebra mussels weren't in the watershed, and we were pushing to have some action from Border Patrol, like Canada Border Services, and or DFO, Department of Fisheries, and they just didn't put the effort into it. And so that's why we're seeing more invasive species here, and like zebra mussels, and there's potential for others.
I've heard something about like freshwater jellyfish.
The other one is a big grass carp, like big mouth carps, which are quite aggressive fish and can really ruin and are in the Mississippi River actually, and that's, with some overland flooding, they could jump over from that watershed into the Red River. So that's one to look for, and hopefully this year isn't the year that they're coming. We have to talk about hydroelectric power as well. So hydroelectricity brings a lot of energy and wealth to the province of Manitoba, but a lot of it was installed without really any concern at all for First Nations. We have examples in northern Manitoba where people were told a week in advance that their homes would be flooded, and the resulting damage is still like decades long of fight for them. And Lake Winnipeg is water held back for the purpose of hydroelectricity, and what suffers is the muskrat and the plants and animals that lives all along the coast of Lake Winnipeg. Many of them have had to retreat into other water areas. We see erosion from that, of course, and other things.
That's the real challenge when we're living in the 21st century, trying to find a means of power for people, but trying to protect the land as well, which is probably why it's important that we should be working more with collectives.
One of the things we're always counseled from our, I guess, our teachings from our elders is the ideas of balance. So I think when a lot of people hear me speaking, they might think that I'm trying to say we should shut down everything. But it's really more about thinking about the water and all the animals and others that live around the lake as deserving of that space as well, right? And starting to have some balance for it. If the idea that we could flip a switch and make as much money as possible at the sacrifice of everything else is not a good way to live. We still want to be here generations from now. We want to have clean water, and we want to still have economies to go with that and all the jobs and wealth that comes with that, but it can't be at the sacrifice of future generations.
There is so much opportunity to move forward in progressive and new ways that can meet all our needs as a developed country while still protecting our wildlife and nature. There needs to be the desire there.
People think about what they like about living here. I am pretty sure a lot of people will think about things like the water and the fish and bison and moose and things that have really been challenged by some of the exploits put upon the land. So.
If we're not careful, it could be really quickly once that all disappears. So I know another big concern right now, Bill 44. It's back under a new name, Bill 36. And I've seen this posted on your social media. So why is it important to be aware of this? And why did the LWIC join a larger collective to stop this proposed bill?
Well, we've been working with partners at Wanuskatan and are following their lead on this one. But when I look at things like Bill 44, now Bill 36, I think that the concern there is you start to remove some of the accountability and transparency that should be there for setting rates in terms of how much hydro is paying, or you don't really want those things to get into the political arena because the needs of political wins as they were could be really unstable and damaging to what's actually needed for our rate setting. So we think about that, the effects of that, having hydro rates help chase the political future of the current standing party if they want to make sure that they have, I wouldn't say they're buying votes, but setting rates to help them with that. The other thing is, when we talk about the way hydro dams were put in communities and imposed on communities and interrupted a way of life, many of those communities still struggle with incredibly high rates of hydroelectricity. So that the cost there is still imposed upon them, even though much of that energy is drawn directly from their land, and the profit and the wealth that comes from that doesn't go to those communities. It goes to, I'm not even sure where it goes, I guess, but it gets distributed into the capital city here.
Well, we need to care for the land and the peoples on these lands. Like, I don't know.
If you look at Canada, we are a colonial power, right? So, and it's it's like, I like to imagine, these like tentacles sort of reaching out into places and really sucking the wealth out of those areas, right? So, and the natural wealth of this land, that it belongs to the land and the peoples that care for it. And to simply rip it away for the benefit of someone here or in another, or maybe even living in another country who's a shareholder to those companies, I think is unethical, frankly, and is part of what needs to be stopped here in Canada. That we have to reverse that role of constantly sucking, wealth out of the northern parts of what is called Canada. I often like to show people that, like, if you look at the map of Canada that we've all been taught, it shows a sort of empty north. We have capital cities along the bottom, and then just big pink and yellow squares in the north. But actually, it's full of life and is full of resources that have been staked and claimed and are being taken. Right, so the people that live there deserve a say in that.
I know when people think of Canada, yeah, it's this open wilderness. There's nothing here. But one of the struggles that we've been seeing is Canada is one of the largest proponents in like destroying native lands or just like natural lands in general, like whether it be tar sands, hydro, cutting down old growth forests, with what we've seen in like Fairy Creek, putting up pipelines. There isn't much care into the protection of these wild spaces. And when we're just looking around worldwide, the amount of wild spaces has drastically gone down. Just here in the Winnipeg area, the Okamic Marsh has shrunk dramatically over the past just couple decades.
If you look all over the world, the people that are caring for land, maintaining biodiversity, maintaining the wealth of those lands are Indigenous peoples. And that's true across so-called Canada too. So it's Indigenous people who take to conserving the land with all of their thoughts, all of their values. It's not just about separating humans from wilderness, as it were, but about living with it, about drawing from it, but drawing from it with limits, right? And I think that there's so much that can be, learned from Indigenous knowledge. It's not. Often we talk about science-based decision-making or evidence-based decision-making. And I really like to show that Indigenous knowledge is as good, and if not a better form of evidence in a lot of cases. Certainly the ability to protect nature is, Indigenous knowledge has proven to be much more effective than a lot of scientific study. And the reasons for that are fairly simple. When it comes down to it, when you look at Lake Winnipeg, for instance, the study of science, understanding what a healthy Lake Winnipeg looks like, the study began after the exploitation had already started. So the lake had already changed quite dramatically. The prairies had been drastically reduced from almost 95% of the original natural habitat had been removed or destroyed in some way. So Lake Winnipeg was already suffering greatly by the time scientists started to measure it. So we have to turn to Indigenous knowledge, Indigenous people, to understand what it looks like to have a healthy Lake Winnipeg and a healthy prairie ecosystem.
And it benefits all of us when our natural areas are protected, are preserved, are flourishing.
Absolutely, yeah.
I know another thing that the LWIC had recently did was rated the federal government's performance on Lake Winnipeg. So I guess, what was the criteria that you were ranking them under, and how did they do?
We presented in partnership with the Lake Winnipeg Foundation a set of 13 immediate actions that could help protect Lake Winnipeg, and they range from things like recognizing phosphorus to using evidence in programming to supporting Indigenous people in protecting lakes and waters. A year after we presented that, we went back and looked and see what had changed, because a lot of these actions are just things that were already committed by governments, that laws were in place, that funding was often in place in these cases, and we still saw very little movement. And we, at one point, we were we had seen some big promises from the Liberal government during the elections that they would increase freshwater funding. Then they didn't. We
Classic.
saw, truly, we've seen them commit to the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which does, is going to have to change the way governments do business. And yet, over the past year, we've still seen the federal government, they're stuck on old ways and old habits, still taking First Nations to court over issues they are almost certainly going to lose, and costing taxpayers money and wasting everyone's time, when we could just get down to, respecting each other and protecting the environment and protecting the children. Much of our ratings were fairly disappointed, I have to say. Couple Fs, couple Cs, and no As. So
Yeah, not a surprise. And we've talked a lot about things and how, disproportionately Indigenous communities are affected by decisions made by our governments in terms of hydro or other like pipelines, other things. For the past half decade, I've been educating myself on the issue, but some, when they hear the term environmental racism, they get very confused. So I know your collective has an environmental racism toolkit. What is it, and what do people need to know about environmental racism?
I like to tell people that they don't have to be scared about environmental racism. I know it sounds scary, and I think it's a good word for that reason, because it does draw your attention, like, oh, what is this? And it's a long established idea. We've seen over the decades that when environmental decisions are made, they're often made at the sacrifice of Indigenous people, of communities of color, who have to bear the burden of toxic spills in some cases. We have places like Grassy Narrows where mercury was dumped right into the river and has caused decades of pain and suffering there. The recovery from environmental disasters is slower when it comes to First Nations and racialized communities. And access sometimes can be really difficult to clean, healthy spaces as well. So when we think of environmental racism, what we would like to see is that people actually know that it exists, so that we can dismantle it. So that when governments make decisions, they're thinking, oh, you know what? The last government might have made this decision in a different way, might have harmed a First Nation when, we have to rethink about how we're going to do those things. The toolkit we put there, so just to help people understand that, so it is on our website, Lake Winnipeg, it's lwic.org. You can search it in there. But I also would want to point to, there's a national federal bill right now, Bill 226, which is the third attempt at a national strategy for environmental racism and justice. And, we're working with the coalition for Canadian Coalition for Environmental and Climate Justice. And we'd like to see that bill expedited, because it's just an important first step in actually recognizing the problem and starting to deal with it.
These conversations around protecting our natural spaces and water sources is more important than ever. Just a kind of final question for you. When we're looking at our communities as a whole, whether you are Indigenous or non-Indigenous, how can we make a difference in preserving our natural spaces and waterways so we can work towards a more beneficial future for all of us?
A lot of our work looks at the bigger systemic problems that do need to change. And when it comes down to it, what we can do as individuals in our life, I always encourage people to reach out and try to understand more about their Indigenous neighbors. There's all kinds of events and things going on these days, and I think there's lots of opportunity there, books to read, all that. So that understanding is super important. But when it comes down to it, we do have to push the elected leaders to actually make better decisions. And they do listen. Sometimes it feels like they don't, but if you write a letter, make a phone call, let them know that you're concerned about the state of the environment, the types of decisions that are being made. Here in Winnipeg, we have a North End treatment plant that is slowly moving along, but it could use a real bump from people like who are listening here.
Have any stories you'd like us to share or communities we should highlight? Leave a comment on our social media or reach out to us on our website. I'm Ryan Funk. This was You Talk, and have yourself a good one.